Jeremiah is sometimes been referred to as the weeping prophet, because in many ways he does come across as a fairly melancholy figure in the stories about him, in the words he speaks and so on. There's a great sense conveyed by the book of the way in which Jeremiah sees himself as rejected, disregarded, not listened to by the people of his day.
Usually people will take prophecy to be telling the future, but that's not necessarily all that prophets do. Jeremiah is bringing a warning. Do these things so that God won't do the things he says he's going to do.
Very complex book when you begin to read it, and certainly if you sit down and try to read through it at one sitting, the 52 chapters would leave an impression of great complexity.
Poor Jeremiah, he's called from a young age, and he does everything that God has called him to do in the text. He just keeps going, and he tells the people these terrible things. And so throughout his life, you see him getting beat up. It's a great narrative as far as communicating the story about this guy who's trying to do something good for the people, and he's beat up by a chief priest and then put in stocks for the night. He's chased down by the prophets of the temple as well as the priests, and they try to put him to death, but eventually the king and the people are like, well, you know, he's bringing us a word from God, so maybe we shouldn't kill him.
It's complex, first of all, in terms of the kinds of material, the varieties of material it contains. There's prose and poetry. There are what look like direct words from the prophet himself, expressed in poetic form.
He goes out to receive an inheritance, a piece of property, and someone thinks he's going out to go over to the Babylonians, who are actually against Jerusalem at the time. And he says, no, I'm just going to get my inheritance. And he says, yeah, right. And he beats him up, throws him in jail. And so at this point, he's an old man getting beat up by a younger guy. And then to top it all off, at one point, he prophesies much at the latter point of his life, and they take him and throw him inside of a muddy cistern. So imagine like your grandfather being hurled over a stone wall, practically drowning in mud. And this is sort of the standard or the pattern of Jeremiah's life as he tries to bring a message that's good for the people, but they just don't want to hear it.
Jeremiah is working in the decades, the years immediately preceding the time of the Jewish exile in Babylon, and indeed the disaster begins to strike the kingdom of Judah and the capital city of Jerusalem, while Jeremiah is still working as a prophet.
When you say beat up, do you mean beat?
Yeah. They actually, it talks about there's a priest called Pashur, the chief priest, says he strikes him. So clearly he's hit him in some way, I would imagine in the face in some way, and then he puts him in stocks. So he binds him up and overnight, and poor Jeremiah is thinking, I did what God was telling me to do, but...
Yeah, there is certainly in Jeremiah a strain of melancholy. And there are a number of passages. They're often referred to slightly misleadingly as Jeremiah's confessions, in which the prophet is portrayed as kind of struggling with God. Why are you making me do this, God? He asks. Why have you made me a laughingstock to everyone around me?
As far as word count goes, Jeremiah is the second longest book in the Bible, just after Psalms. It's got about 1,000 words less than Psalms, but chapter-wise, it's pretty lengthy as well, over 50 chapters. But Jeremiah is full of really great imagery. So if you're into pictures, metaphors, these things, Jeremiah is a text to go for. But just as an example, it's not terribly famous, but a really good example of of how he talks. Jeremiah 17:1 says, "The sin of Judah is written with an iron pen, with a diamond point. It is engraved on the tablet of their hearts and on the horns of their altars." So this is sort of I guess you'd say, a theme or a really the style of Jeremiah.
One of the interesting small features of the book of Jeremiah is that we have a lot of names in Jeremiah, and some of these names turn up in archaeological excavations in Jerusalem as part of seal rings. This is if you want to sign a paper or seal a paper, you have a ring with a kind of engraved stone with your name and sometimes with a sign. And this you press into the wet clay. And so when the clay then burns in the destruction of the city, the document which you sealed is gone, but at least the clay imprint of your seal ring is left behind, and this helps then archaeologists. And there was found a whole lot of these seal rings. So the most famous of this seal belongs to Berachyu, the Berachyahu ben Neriyahu HaSofer. That means to Berachya or Baruch, as we have it in our Bible, son of Neriyahu the scribe. And this figure is actually mentioned in the book of Jeremiah as the personal secretary, friend and confidant of the prophet Jeremiah. The person who made this impression with his ring was the friend and secretary of Jeremiah. Unfortunately, we only have the seal ring and not what he has written. So it might be interesting to see what he has written besides writing down part of the book of Jeremiah.
The Jewish exile in Babylon, it's a fairly complex phenomenon and in some ways quite difficult to speak about. But broadly, it begins in the early years of the 6th century BC, when the great imperial power in the ancient Near East was Babylon, and Babylon aimed to control the smaller territories in the eastern part of the Mediterranean area, including the little kingdom of Judah with its capital in Jerusalem. For a time, Judah loyally accepted Babylonian overlordship, Babylonian control, but then just after 600, the Jews in Jerusalem, the kingdom of Judah, rebelled against that Babylonian control. That brought about a deportation of a number of the inhabitants, and 10 years later, in the year 587, the city was besieged, the city of Jerusalem was besieged, it was destroyed by the Babylonians. The great temple which had been built by Solomon was destroyed. But the whole experience, as the Old Testament portrays it, had a devastating impact on the life and the experience of the kingdom and the people of Judah and Jerusalem. They thought that their God would protect them. They believed that God was with them. They believed that they would be ultimately invulnerable to destruction, and that proved not to be the case. And people ask the question, therefore, where is our God in all this? It becomes a great kind of crucible, a great kind of melting pot for the fundamental questions about where is God in all this? Has he proved, in fact, powerless to help us? Or has he, in fact, been active in these events in other kinds of ways? Is he himself in some way responsible for bringing about the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the temple in the experience of exile in Babylon? The book of Jeremiah, very much concerned with these issues about why Jerusalem is doomed. Jeremiah, speaking before this event, announces that it's going to happen, and as the prophets always do, gives reasons why it's going to happen. And he sees those reasons in terms of a breakdown of Israel's relationship with God. Very often that breakdown of relationship with God is seen in terms of the kind of social injustice, breakdown within the moral fabric and the social fabric of society. That's the way the prophets very often understand the nature of their failed relationship with God. And Jeremiah announces that because of that failed relationship with their God, the kingdom of Judah and its city Jerusalem will be given into the power of Babylon.
The book starts in Jerusalem. He's talking while he's in Jerusalem. It ends in Egypt because Jeremiah, for saying all the things that he does, people don't like the things that he say, but they don't want him to go over to the Babylonians. And the Babylonians have taken the city of Jerusalem, and there's been a minor revolt. And Jeremiah's like, well, you should just stay. This is what God is saying for you to do. And they say, no, now you're coming with us. We're going to Egypt. And so they take him off to Egypt. You know, life continues with the insults and whatever that are leveled against Jeremiah. And it sort of peters out there at the end.